Hi folks, it's Ivo here from Thundermist Lure Company, and welcome to today's segment of Thundermist Fishing Tips. This is part 3 of our series on understanding fishing line, and today we're going to talk about braided line. We talked previously about mono and fluorocarbon. Today we're going to concentrate on braided line and talk about advantages, disadvantages, and when you should use braided line. Okay, let's start off with the disadvantages of braided line. Well, I guess one of the disadvantages of braided line is that it is expensive. You'll find it on the shelf, and it's just as expensive as fluorocarbon and a lot more expensive than monofilament. So you're going to pay a little bit more for braided line. The other disadvantage to braid is that fish can see it. And I know people use braided line directly to their lures and they say they catch fish, but you know what? You're probably missing a lot of fish too, because fish can see that line, and especially if they're a little bit leery, they're just not going to hit. So that's a disadvantage. Now mind you, there is a way around that, and we're going to talk about that. Okay, let's talk about advantages now of braided line. One of the biggest advantages of braided line is that there's no stretch. So what that means is you've got a direct link between yourself and your lure, and of course in the fish. So when you go to set the hook, it's direct and it's instant, and you get real good hook penetration and real good hook sets. And the other thing is, because there's no stretch, you feel absolutely everything. If you're working a bait along the bottom, you'll feel it working over top of the rocks, or if you have a subtle hit, you'll be able to sense that hit and set the hook. So a great advantage to braided line, very, very sensitive, and you'll hook into more fish. The other advantage to braided line is that it falls through the line, through the water very, very nicely, and it's got great shelf life. It doesn't weaken, and you could use it actually even into the second year. I've run braided line all year and ran it even a second year with no problem. So it has great shelf life, good durability. Another real big advantage to braided line that I like a lot is you could put on a spinning reel, you could put 50-pound test braided line on a spinning reel, for example, if you wanted to. Whereas you couldn't put 50-pound monofilament or 50-pound fluorocarbon on a spinning reel because it just comes off like a coil. It's just not made to handle heavy line. But with braided line, because it's so thin in diameter and it's different consistency, you can put heavy line on a spinning reel, and that's an advantage we've never really had before when it comes to using spinning reels. So that's a huge advantage to fishing with braided line. And the other thing is, because it's such thin diameter, if you're fishing off the surf, let's say for example, and you got to have a big reel to have lots of line on there, that's not the case anymore, because with braided line, you could put a lot of braided line at so fine diameter onto just a regular sized reel. So that's another real big advantage to braided line. So when should you use braided line? Well, first of all, anytime I use braided line, anytime, I always use a fluorocarbon leader. I tie a leader on to the end of my braided line. I tie fluorocarbon because fish can't see fluorocarbon, and that way I eliminate that disadvantage of fish being able to see the braided line. So that's the first thing I do right away. And don't be afraid to put a long leader line onto your braid. I like to use, as a general rule, if there's a 6-foot rod, I'll put 12 feet of leader line on. So twice the length of the rod as a general rule. And ideally, when I'm using braid, I like to use it with anytime I'm bottom bouncing, drifting, working a jig, live bait fishing. The only time I really wouldn't use braided line is if I'm casting crankbaits. Other than that, I'm using braided line all the time, and I absolutely love it. So those are your advantages, disadvantages. That concludes section number 3 on fishing line. I hope you've enjoyed all 3 segments. And as always, folks, if you do have any questions, feel free to write in. We're welcoming questions all the time. We do our best to get back to you. And I want to thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of Thundermist Fishing Tips. And as always, folks, until next time, good luck and good fishing.